The Masked Empire by Patrick Weeks. Chapter 11. Why, by the Dreadwolf, will you bring them here? Thelhen, the Dalish keeper, was an elven man of middle years. On his back was strapped the glowing red staff that had ignited his people's arrows last night. Beneath his tattoos, his face was lined and pale with fatigue, and his hair had gone silver. Briella might have called the face kindly, were it not red with rage that morning as he yelled at Flaccid in the middle of the Dalish camp while she sat, hands bound behind her, and by one of their great wagons. Flaccid grinned. You needed to meet new people. The Dalish keeper made an angry gesture. I spent years finding the right location and preparing my spells. I have risked contact with the Shemlin to get what I needed. Well then, if you've already made contact with the humans, there should be nothing. Now, Thelhen said, as if Flaccid hadn't spoken. When I am this close to gaining what we need, you bring some human noble and her champion? Thelhen grimaced in disgust. Clan Vernon has sullied itself enough without your foolish ideas. And her! He wheeled on Brielle. She kept her back straight and her eyes on him as he glared at her. Abalas, Haren, I intended no disrespect. Stop, child. Her words seemed to take some of the anger out of him, and he sighed, then turned back on Flaccid. You expect me to adopt strays? Why not send her to your own clan if she is so valuable? Is she at least a mage? At that, Flaccid's expression went blank. You took what information I had given you over the years, Thelhen. That information came from her, a gift to the people she thought of as hers. A lovely sentiment. Thelhen wiped his face wearily. But why is she here? Briella stood up straighter. The elves of Orlais have suffered, Keeper. If Grand Duke Espad comes to power, they will suffer even more. If you help restore Empress Celine, you will save many of your people in the alienages of Orlais. Thelhen shut his eyes and looked away from her. Abalas, Thelhen, he said quietly. But I have no people in the alienages of Orlais. Briella sat quietly then, and listened to the argument while she looked around the camp. The great wagons, the aravels, were arranged in a circle like the buildings of a small town. She could pick out the purpose of some of them. One held bows and a Fletcher's tools. Not far from it, Dalish children practiced shooting arrows at stump targets painted like men. Near another aravel, crates were filled with vegetables, while smoked meat hung nearby, and behind a third wagon, Dalish warriors swung wooden blades at target dummies. Briella tracked their motions and saw that the drills were the same she had seen 100 times at Celine's family estate or in Val Royale. They were not her people. The words should have hurt, but Briella felt empty instead. She looked at elven children laughing and playing, elven hunters joking about their skill, elven cooks singing old songs while their apprentices cleaned up the dishes from breakfast. Through the open door of one of the wagons, she could see an old couple sleeping, snoring softly. There were no princesses, no fade spirit whisking through the aravels to do the laundry, but it was still more than she could have ever dreamed of. None of them ducked their heads or watched with concern for the humans. None of them feared a human walking into their camp to cause trouble. And they let the alienages burn because the elves in the alienages were not their people. She came back to the argument between Flaccid and Thelhen. The Dalish keeper had finished yelling. He seemed tired. Flaccid was calm, as always, and smiling faintly. Fine, Thelhen said finally. Your apprentice may walk the camp, though you vouch for her behavior. And her life is forfeit if she approaches the Elgar Allah. The Shemlin warrior remains bound, and the noble will be guarded until she awakens. I will speak with the clan leaders and see whether they will hear what this noble has to say." He gestured irritably, and a young woman holding a slender staff of her own came over and untied Briella's bonds. She was not yet 20, and the tattoos on her face were fresh and sharp, a year old, at most. Her fingers were deft, but calloused from work. The linen of her tunic had clearly come from trade with humans, though it had been stitched in an elegant pattern Briella didn't recognize, and trimmed with fur and wire-wrapped crystals. Briella tried to read the look of the young woman gave her. It was not disgust, but it was not welcoming. Thelin and the young woman left, and Flasson helped Briella to her feet. "You never told me," she said. "Oh, Briella, by the way, the people you idolized for most of your life are actually pompous idiots." Flasson shook his head. "Would you have listened?" "Yes." "Would you have heard?" His expression did not change, and he began to walk out through the Aravels. Briella followed him. "They don't care." "They do not." "Well, that's unfair. They care for the past." Flasson pointed at one of the cooks singing in the elven tongue. She was mixing dough in a cheap tin bowl that had been painted with icons of Silice, the hearth keeper. They care a great deal for it, in fact. They spend their lives searching old bits to preserve and pass on. The old language, the old empire, the old secrets. But the present, he shrugged. The present is apparently much less exciting. So while we struggle and endure and burn, they dig in old ruins to learn the elven word for diamond? Briella kept her voice low as she looked around the camp. "Midurgen. I helped them." This time, her voice broke a little. "Not just the elves and the aliens that aren't their people. I helped them with what I gave you over the years." "I know, Dylan. So does Thelin, much as he hates to admit it." Flasson glanced to the side, and Briella noted the elven hunters watching them as they left camp and walked into the forest. "That is why you and your friends are alive." "What do we do?" she asked, looking at the trees warily. In the morning light, they were just trees, the few elves still hanging from the branches, brown and dead. None looked ready to come to life and crush them. "Can we try another clan? Your clan, maybe." No. My clan is nowhere near here." Flasson winced. "Despite the name, most of the Dalish clans have fled the Dales, scattered to make it harder for anyone to attack everyone at once. If your Empress wants help getting back to Val Royeaux before Gaspard," he shrugged, "we wait for the healers to awaken her. You say that she is very persuasive. Last night she moved the trees." He smiled absently. "Perhaps today she will move mountains." "Shemlin." The elven war leader standing over Michelle said it with a sneer, then grinned at his men. Michelle was bound, tied near one of the wagons. Celine lay nearby on a bedroll with an elven girl, an apprentice mage, judging by her staff, tending her. Her color was better than it had been since last night, or what little of it he'd seen the night before. They had stitched the wound from where she had fallen and hit her head, and the elven girl was using healing magic to reduce the inflammation. She hadn't spoken a word to him, just leaned over Celine, her hand extended and glowing with a cool white light that made Michelle's skin crawl. The elven warriors had spoken to Michelle, of course, but their vocabulary was limited. "Shemlin," their leader said again. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with muscle in his arms that spoke of a lifetime holding a blade, and he was the oldest of the warriors standing over Michelle. "Do you know what we do to your kind here?" "Well," he pretended to think about it. "In truth, it depends on how much time we have. If we're in a hurry, we just shoot you, like a wolf with the water sickness. But if we have a few days, there's a game called Fenharel's Teeth. Some of his warriors laughed along. At least one of them, though the youngest, stopped and stared awkwardly off to the trees. "We take your clothes and lash your hands together," the elven war leader said. "And we give you leggings of hard leather, with little nails driven through so that every step you take sends them digging in. We give you 100 count head start, and we see how long you can elude us with every step you take as it must be absolutely burn you that you can't touch me," Michelle said without changing expression. The war leader blinked, then recovered. "Once Keeper Thelen has what he needs, we'll do more than just touch you, Shemlin." Each time he said the word Shemlin, there was a little pause, where he looked at Michelle to see if he'd drawn blood. Michelle suspected that the elf would do the same thing after a sword thrust, and noted it in case it became relevant later. In any case, the war leader could only be disappointed. Each time he threw that insult at Michelle, it just made Michelle smile more. "And until your leader has what he wants, will you posture some more before a bond captive?" Michelle asked. "Unless I become too threatening, in which case you might go scare the children or yell at trees." The war leader glared. "Flassen called you a chevalier. He said that they were the greatest of Shemlin warriors. Perhaps I will show you what a true master of the blade can do." "Like those children playing with sticks by your wagon?" Michelle gestured with his chin over to where the warriors were training. "The man you have training them drags his feet when he sidesteps. In a real fight, I'd have his leg off in 3 heartbeats." The war leader glanced over despite himself, as did the warriors. "You should spend more time training your people, or did you not notice the problem yourself?" "You insult my clan." The war leader raised his hand. Michelle snorted. "You insult your own clan if you cannot control your temper to obey your master's orders. I have given insult to neither your blood, your history, nor your way of life. Only the personal honor of a mongrel who lacks manners." Nevertheless, the war leader's hand cracked hard across Michelle's face, and when Michelle's vision cleared, the elf was smiling again. "Know your place, Shemlin." He turned to his warriors. "Watch him. If he does anything suspicious, kill him." The war leader stalked back to his wagon, leaving the others to stand guard. Michelle settled in comfortably to wait. After a time, he performed quiet muscle exercises to keep his limbs from going numb. One of the warriors noticed, the youngest, who seemed uncomfortable earlier, but said nothing. It was relaxing, almost like meditation in the chantry, to have no duties and no responsibilities. He let his awareness wander, taking in the motions of the camp. The cooks prepared the midday meal, a stew of wild rabbit mixed with vegetables and spices, served along with what Michelle recognized from 30 yards away as peasant bread. It was almost equal parts wheat, salt, and grease, and in lean winters, it was sometimes the only thing that could put meat on a peasant's bones. It had been years since Michelle had eaten it. Watching an old elven woman drizzle honey across a piece now, he remembered his mother putting a bit of sugar on his piece, sugar she'd stolen from a tavern where she worked. His mouth watered, and he looked away. The young warriors stopped training with blades and took up bows. Hunters came back to camp with rabbits or deer. As the hours passed, Michelle was forced to admit that the camp was run well, more like a military camp than a cave full of knife-eared bandits he had expected. Every elf was busy, moving with purpose on their duties, and unlike the military camp, the people he thought of as servants weren't treated any worse than the hunters or the guards. They called happily to each other across ranks, trading greetings or jibes like a family. Michelle wasn't certain when the music started to move him, but he felt the slow relaxation ease him into a soothing rhythm as he sat and watched the camp. The music had no source, no melody. It was not even a sound exactly. It was simply a pleasant and drowsy feeling, like being rocked to sleep by a lullaby. even as part of his mind was confused, noting that the rest of the camp was walking and moving to the same invisible rhythm. The rest of him was calm and content. It seemed perfectly natural when one of the warriors leaned down and cut Michelle's bonds. The warrior's eyes were vacant, staring peacefully at something only he would see. The other warrior was smiling at nothing, shifting idly from side to side in a slow rhythm. Michelle stood without fear or preparation. The healer kept tending Celine, preparing more herbs with a mortar, humming gently to herself. The warriors tapped their hands against their legs to the melody. No one seemed concerned as the warrior they had been guarding stood up, and Michel himself was not concerned either. A voice at the back of his mind was shouting in alarm, urging him to grab a weapon, but he ignored that part of his mind and walked calmly past the wagon where he had been kept. As he walked, turning his back on the guards without fear, his pace was in step with the tune that the healer had been humming. The elven scouts at the edge of the camp paid him no mind. One of them was whistling to the same melody to herself. A trail led from the camp into the forest. Michel walked at an easy pace, allowing the melody to guide him along the winding path that had led him down a gentle slope, until the trees ended in a little clearing. It was as if the Maker had scooped out a fistful of earth to make the clearing, leaving a bowl-shaped indentation perhaps 100 yards across. In the center of a bowl stood a circle of stones, etched with runes that glowed faintly in the afternoon light. In the center of the circle of stones stood a human man in a dark coat. He was short and balding, with a thin black beard and glittering beady eyes. He was whistling the tune, snapping his fingers and tapping his feet in time to the beat. Michel was almost to the circle of stones when the runes on the nearest stone flashed. The music spun away, torn like cobwebs, and Michel shuddered and fell to his knees. It was like waking up from a deep sleep to find himself mid-conversation. Everything seemed so sharp and bright. The grass beneath Michel's hands was cold and slick, and it felt as though the ground were twisting. "Want to hear a joke?" the man in the circle asked. From his light accent, he could have been a minor noble in Celine's court. Michel's whole body was shivering, and his teeth were chattering madly. He tensed his muscles, forcing his body through the centering exercises a chevalier used to fight drugs or magic. What? Sir Michel de Chevin walks into a tavern, the man in the circle said. The barman looks up at him and says, "We don't serve elves here." Sir Michel says, "Fine with me. There's no good meat on them anyway." He laughed long and hard. "What did you do to me?" Michel stood with an effort, moving into his fighting stance rather than risk trying to stand upright. The ground still tilted beneath his feet, but the centering exercises were helping. He kept his breath even and slow, ignoring the prickle of cold sweat that had been broken out all over his body. "Distracted the guards and freed you from the bondage to those damned knife ears," the man in the circle said with gusto. "All as an act of charity." He caught his head. "Oh, specifically?" "A little trick from the Fade. Encourages people to not notice you. Useful for getting out of those troublesome situations, or watching ladies undress. Not," he added, "that I ever would, because that would be wrong." Michel looked at the man and at the circle of stones. "You're a demon." "Spirit," the man said, smiling broadly. "Please, call me Ishmael." "Please, call me Imshel." "Why?" Imshel, if that was his name, smiled. "Well, you have to call me something." Michel glared. Why did you bring me here? I brought you here because you and I have a similar problem. Imshael stepped forward until he neared the edge of the stone circle and smiled thinly. We both like to be somewhere, and someone. We're not. The demon left no prints in the grass where he walked. His black coat was finely tailored, and the buckles of his black boots glittered. I've heard of things like you, Michelle said, trying to remember the old stories. You're a desire demon. Choice. Spirit. Ishmael's smile never wavered. Do I look like a desire demon? Do you want me to strip down and put on something flimsy and filmy and sheer? At Michelle's glare, the demon sighed. There are all kinds of spirits, boy. Spirits of love and honor, valor and justice. He waved a hand absently, turning to pace along the edge of the circle. And yes, also rage and hunger and pride. We all carry some connection to this world to bring us through the veil. Michelle began to walk around the outside of the circle, keeping pace with the demon. His body had largely recovered from whatever the demon had done, but for a little loose-limbed shakiness, as though Michelle had just finished a good workout. The yellow autumn grass crumbled beneath his steps as he walked. And what brought you? Nothing, this time. Those damned elves called me here into the circle. Imshael rapped a knuckle against one of the stones as he passed it, then winced as a spark of crackling energy stung his hand. Trapped me in here. I can't leave, and I can't return to the Fade. I can't even use my power. Michelle remembered the song that had touched the minds of everyone near him. You used your power in the camp. What, that trick? Imshael smirked. No. My power is a bit more consequential. Michelle was silent for a moment, then gave in and asked the question. Why have they brought you here? They want me to help them regain a bit of their history. You know about history, Mr. Michelle? Not especially, demon. Michelle kept walking. See, you think of Alam Sharal as the old elven capital. But before that, before the boys in Tevinter had their fun, the elves had a much grander place to call home. Arlathan. Imshael grinned. Ah, so you did listen to the lessons in the slums from your dear old elven mother. At Michelle's glare, he raised his hands in apology. Sorry. You mortals always get touchy about those thoughts leaking out of your head. Yes, Arlathan. But that was just the capital of the ancient empire. All of this, Orlais, Ferelden, those bits over to the west, all of it was part of Elvenon. Now, if you dig deep enough under most of Orlais, you run into old tombs where the noble elven dead were buried. Imshael's eyes narrowed. And as it turns out, most of those tombs are connected by the Alluvions. Michelle stopped and turned to face the demon. There are secret passages beneath Orlais. Imshael snorted. Secret passages? No, boy, you're thinking of dwarves. The elves weren't much for walking. The Alluvions are magical mirrors. You walk into one of them, journey through a kind of in-between place for a bit, and come out the other side several days' ride elsewhere. The demon tapped one of the circle stones again, grimacing at the spark of energy that stung his fingers. Old elven magic. Always have to respect old elven magic. And you use these to travel. Michelle looked closely at the demon. There was a trap. There was always a trap. Every story that had the young man dealing with the demons always had the demons spring a trap. The key was that in some stories, the young man could twist that trap back around on the demon and win the day. Yes, You use it to travel. Good on you for listening. You could get from Jader to Val Royeaux without seeing daylight if you wanted. Imshael stopped and shot Michelle a look. Don't get any ideas, Chevalier. It's a lot of old, dangerous magic, and some texts you'd probably just burn. I don't imagine there are any magic swords for you to find there. He started walking again, still leaving no footsteps. Regardless, the Illuvians have been sleeping ever since you lads took Halam Sharal. Our friend the Keeper is trying to get me to awaken them. Michelle hurried to catch up. So why not do what he asks? Deeply concerned for my welfare, are you? I'm touched. Imshael smiled, but it twisted into a snarl after a moment. He can't give me what I need. A rage demon feeds on anger. A pride demon lives off his delusions men choose when they stare in the mirror every morning. And I need a choice. Thelhin wants the Illuvians awakened, but there's nothing more to it. He won't submit to the consequence of his own actions. Do you understand? No. Imshael chuckled. Honest man. Well, mostly. What if I told you that if you found me a mortal and got him to put his bleeding palm to one of these damned stones, I would make the story of Sir Michel de Chevin true? Michel blinked. How? More effectively than your patron, Comte Brevin, bribing a forger. Imshael grinned, and his beady eyes glittered among a field of old laugh lines. A few spirits whispering in a few dreams. A few documents falsified by men who will never remember doing so. The next time one of Gaspard's bards goes digging, she finds that Michel de Chevin is exactly who he says he is, and living men will swear by the sadly absent maker that they remember growing up with you. The noble and honest and entirely human Sir Michel. And in return, I'd get to leave this damned circle and live inside the man who bled on the stone. Imshael took a deep, happy breath. It's been some time since I got to see the world. I'd like to look around a bit. Michelle stopped, teeth clenched in anger. You would have me curse some poor creature to your possession? Yes. Imshael turned to him, and though there was a smile on the demon's face, his eyes seemed to burn. Not pleasant, is it? That's what makes it a choice. Michelle spun away and started walking again. He saw footprints in the grass ahead of him and realized he'd come all the way around the stone circle. I should destroy you. Breaking a couple of runes should do it, Imshael said without breaking stride. Of course, then you'd spend the rest of your life waiting for someone to find out who you really are. I know who I really am, Michelle said, and left the clearing and the demon. The scouts at the edge of camp jumped when they saw him. Their bows snapped up with admirable efficiency, and they yelled an alarm even as they took aim, their eyes wide and bewildered as they darted glances back towards the camp where, by all rights, Michelle should have been tied up. Michelle raised his hands. I surrender, he said. Take me back to my empress. For a moment, he thought they would simply shoot him, but then, after trading looks, they closed in on Michelle instead. One hung back, bow still raised, while the other grabbed him and shoved him to the ground. He endured the shouts and punches and kicks without complaint. If it got him back to Celine, it would be worth it. He knew how she was going to take back Orlais. Celine had been awakened by the elven healer in the early afternoon and informed that the others were wandering the Dalish camp. Still woozy, she had sat up, noted the guards with their weapons already drawn, and asked to speak to their keeper. She had expected Michelle and possibly even Briala to be tied up as well. Since they only had kept her bound, the Dalish likely understood her value as a potential hostage. That was, if not auspicious, at least a good place to start. Now, with her head still aching and elven guards standing over her, Celine sat before Keeper and elders of the Dalish clan and negotiated for her life. She had no idea where Briella and Michelle were, and she refused to show weakness by asking. Once Gaspard is put down, she said, I can ensure the Dalish gain a new measure of respect in Orlais, and we look forward to learning from your wisdom. We already have elves attending our universities, and it would be an honor to allow your people to visit. You do not have the strength to fight this Gaspard, the ancient hearthmistress said, her cracked voice laced with skepticism. Yet you think to offer us help? Power accumulates, Celine said with confidence, like a snowball rolling down a hill. I do not need you to fight Gaspard for me. I only need you to use your skills to help me reach Val Royeaux before Gaspard does. Once I do that, Gaspard will have no chance to oppose me, and I will crush his rebellion and put him to death. Leaving you free to break your promises, the war leader said, like the humans before you. The keeper waved him to silence. You would have me risk the lives of my clan to help smuggle you past your rival soldiers, and in return you offer what? A challenge to visit your buildings? Celine wanted a drink, but reminding them that she was at their mercy would weaken her place in the discussion. I don't know what you want, Keeper. If you have a proposal, I can certainly... You destroyed the greatest empire this land has ever seen. The war leader stepped forward, fists drawn back. And when our people banded with Andraste to give freedom from Tevinter, you betrayed us again. She sat unflinching before his anger, then turned to the keeper. This discussion is unlikely to change the past, she said. If you have a request, name it. You do not understand, the keeper said. He gestured again, and the war leader stepped back. You ask us to speak logically, when our entire history is filled with your people betraying and degrading ours. You took our land, our culture, and even our immortality. And you do not seem to understand the opportunity that has landed in your lap. Celine glared at the war leader, then at the keeper. This is the time to demand reparations. Do you wish conditions improved for the elves in our cities? Free immigration to the Dalish clans? Seeing their blank faces, she took a gamble. Honorary lordship of Halam Sharal and the surrounding lands? She had gambled wrong. She saw that immediately as their shoulders drew back, the tattoos on their face twisting as they grimaced in revulsion. But she couldn't tell why. Honorary lordship, the war leader sneered. Your nature pollutes us, the keeper said slowly. The poor creatures in the lineages you think of as elves are but poor cousins lost to us forever. Some clans might accept a few of them to strengthen their numbers, or even out of misguided pity, but they are not our people. Do you understand that, Shemlin Empress? Do you think to offer a partnership to let us sit in Halam Sharal and deal with Shemlin merchants and flat-eared peasants who have forgotten everything of ancient Elvenon and bow to you on your throne in Val Royeaux? He shook his head. If you and Gaspard slew each other, and the war killed every human in Orlais, and burned every alienage to the ground, then we would be willing to return to Halam Sharal. It shook her, though she kept her face calm. Then why are we talking, Keeper? Because that idiot Philasson brought you here, Shemlin Empress. The Keeper grimaced. And now we must decide which of the way of the three trees to follow. Do we give you some token aid and hope for some token gesture later? Do we give you Gaspard and hope for the same? Or do we kill you, burn your body, and hope that you bring Clan Vernon less trouble in death than you do in life? The silence was broken a moment later by the shouting from the edge of the camp. The keeper and the elders looked over, while Celine sat as calmly as she could, trying to think. The pain in her head was dull but steady, and her wits were slower than usual. She was the Empress of Orlais. She was without her gowns, her jewels, her armies, but that should not have mattered. She had played the game and won for 20 years, but these elves played by different rules. If she did not learn them quickly, they would clearly finish what Gaspard had started. She would not allow that. What is this? The war leader shouted. How did he escape? Celine looked over then and saw Sir Michel, bruised and bloodied, being dragged into the camp by a group of scouts. He escaped? Celine had assumed he and Briella had been held somewhere else in the camp, either to interrogate them or minimize the chance of all prisoners coordinating an escape. The war leader looked at her with contempt. Did you think we would let a Shemlin warrior walk free? Bad enough that we let Flassen's pet loose. He was tied up beside you until... He broke off, paused, then shook his head, staring at the spot next to Celine in confusion. He was gone when I awoke. Celine looked at the guards nearby. Perhaps you might question the men who let a bound prisoner escape without noticing for several hours? I did not escape, Michel shouted as the scouts dragged him closer, his voice hoarse. They had not been gentle. I would not leave my empress. The war leader strode forward and yanked Michel's head up by the hair. Then how? My mind was taken by magic. Michel met the war leader's stare evenly, as were the guards. They cut me free, and I came to my senses by a stone circle with a demon standing inside. Celine watched the keeper go white, the tattoos on his face suddenly livid against the parlor. Fear, she understood. Whatever the cause, even maker forbid a demon, fear could be played the same way here as in the court in Valroyaux. Has there been some misunderstanding? She asked with an innocent smile. Bind him, the keeper snapped. The scouts threw Michel to the ground, and the guards quickly tied his arms and legs. Mears, come, we'll see to the wards. The keeper left without another word, and the young healer who had treated Celine's head ran to catch up with him. That was one gone. The rest of the Dalish stared at Celine and Michel with varying degrees of disgust and fear. For a moment, Celine wondered if she had miscalculated again, if they would kill her on the spot. I demand to know what's going on, she said. She glanced at Michel and he gave a tiny nod. Your treatment has been intolerable, and refusing to explain yourselves. Enough! The war leader turned to the clan elders. I will deal with them. They nodded and, looking back with anger and fear on their tattooed faces, left Celine and Michel. That left only one, although he had been the one ready to attack her right from the start. You have endangered my clan with your foul magic, Shemlin, the war leader said to Michel. His fists were clenched, his face flushed with anger, and the marks on his face seemed to pulse as his jaw twitched. I will see you dead. Let the scouts beat me for a few more hours first, Michel said through bloodied lips, and perhaps you will stand a chance. Celine shot him a warning look, but Michel matched her stare, and after a moment, she understood. The elven war leader would see any sign of submission as weakness, and right now, weakness could see them killed. When you fight him, Sir Michel, please allow him an ally, she said, in the interest of a fair fight. The war leader glared and stalked off, and the guards, looking at Michel and Celine nervously, went some distance away. They stood close enough to keep a close watch on Celine, but far enough that they could talk to each other without being overheard. She saw the quick, furtive motions of their hands, the nervous shifting. They would have been laughed out of Lady Montillon's sitting room, so obvious was their fear. My apologies for taking the initiative in that conversation, Michel said quietly. Hush, Michel. You were correct, and you well know it. That is no excuse for overruling the opinion of the Empress, Michel said with a smile that caused a scab on his lip to split open. They will almost certainly kill us, Celine murmured. Whatever you found is worth our lives. That may be, Majesty, but it may also save them. Celine started in surprise. Magic? Indeed. He lowered his voice even further. The elves have summoned a demon. They seek to unlock ancient magical mirrors that allowed the elves to travel undetected across all of Orlais, protected by magic, secret for centuries. Celine went still. I could get back safely to Valroyaux. More than that, you could move scouts or small teams in secret. Michelle added, to strike Gaspard without warning and crush him without mercy. Celine smiled slowly. Now all we need to do is not let them kill us. It seemed the visit to the Dalish had not been a waste at all. With a gentle patter, the first rainfall of autumn began to pour down. Brielle parted ways with Flassin in the woods. Her mentor had mentioned a nearby lake that would give her a chance to get clean. He had also suggested delicately that staying away from the Dalish camp would be safer at the moment. Time, he said, would open a path for them. She took him at his word, more than willing to leave the Dalish alone. She found the lake with little trouble. It was small and placid, fed by a river that came down from the frostbacks to the east. Lily pads covered the surface, and dragonflies danced in the air overhead, seizing one last chance to find a mate. The dark gray clouds rolling down from the north brought them a cold wind, but Brielle stripped off her armor and underclothes anyway. She rinsed off her underclothes and wrung them out, then laid them down to dry and stepped into the water herself. It was shockingly cold, but she kept moving, first into her ankles, then her knees, and then the final step down that plunged her beneath the water. For a moment, then, the icy ache became numbness, and she felt nothing except the tiny ripples of the waves pulling her to and fro. She remembered. Coming up from the water, 10-year-old Brielle shook her head. Brielle, you'll get bath water everywhere, her mother scolded, though she laughed as she said it. Come now, wash your hair. We need you nice and clean so that you can wait on Miss Celine tomorrow. Brielle tugged her hair down into her face. Celine doesn't want Lady Montillon to come. She says that Lady Montillon is scary. Brielle's mother smiled, glancing quickly at the door. Miss Celine has nothing to worry about. Lady Montillon loves her very much. Hurry now. She reached in and worked the knots from Brielle's hair. You want to look nice. Why? Brielle asked, scrubbing her feet with a soapy brush. Lady Montillon never even looks at us. She would if you were dirty, her mother said with certainty, yanking on Brielle's hair. Can't we fix my hair to cover my ears? Her mother's hands went still. Mother? No, child. You must never cover your ears. Her mother's voice got, then held. Why? Brielle pulled away, then turned around and looked up. Will I get in trouble for trying to pass? Perhaps. Her mother smiled again, but her cheeks were flushed. But more than that, you are my daughter, Brielle. We serve a prince, and you serve Miss Celine. None of those Dalish elves can say that. You should be proud of who you are. Under the water, Brielle reached down with her toes, poking past weeds and looking for solid ground. Coming up from the water, 20-year-old Brielle saw the coach driver fall with a dart in his throat. The water slid from her oil-sealed clothes, and she made no noise as she pulled herself onto the low bridge. In the moonless darkness, she was just another shadow. The horses were restless, and she patted their sides to calm them, then opened the crate she had used to block the bridge and forced the coach driver to stop. She took her bow and quiver from the crate, walked around the side of the coach, and shot an arrow through the door. A moment later, she eased the door open and looked inside. The arrow had taken Lady Montillon in the abdomen. The wound barely showed against the older woman's heavenly burgundy gown, but her face was deathly pale. My apologies for the graceless introduction, Brielle said, but I feared you suspected an attack and would have something prepared if I had just opened the door. With a tiny smile, Lady Montillon gestured to a tiny, jeweled stiletto that lay on the floor, barely more than a knitting needle with a coating of oily black liquid along the blade. You feared correctly, Brielle. Brielle started, then recovered. So you remember me. Her hair tied back and braided to keep it out of the way, even when wet dripped cold water down her back. I thought we all looked the same to you. I remember Celine's beautiful elven servant girl, who watched everything so carefully. Lady Montillon's voice was bare whisper, and Brielle leaned in closer to hear her. I wondered if Celine might have passed on her lessons in the bardic arts. She did. Brielle smiled and drew her dagger. All the better to avenge my parents. Ah, Lady Montillon nodded. And after I am dead, Brielle, what will you do? Brielle leaned in. I will return to Celine, she said, and make her the greatest empress Orlais has ever seen. And if anyone tries to use her, to turn her into someone like you, I will see to it that they die forgotten. She expected the words to sting, but Lady Montillon seemed to relax instead. The older woman let out a long breath and settled back, wincing as her breath caught. When she spoke again, her voice was louder. I regret the deaths of your family, Brielle. She caught Brielle's gaze and calmly asked, Was there anything else? No. Brielle stabbed just as she had learned, up between the ribs, and Lady Montillon flinched, nodded once, and went still. As her body relaxed, a second tiny stiletto fell from her hand and clattered on the floor of the coach. Brielle stared at it in disbelief. Lady Montillon had almost certainly been close enough to strike. Brielle herself had leaned in to hear her last whispered words better. And yet, Lady Montillon had stayed her hand. Foolish noblewoman. Brielle stepped out of the coach, then cut the horses from their harnesses and slapped their flanks. They ran off into the night, and she turned and walked back across the low bridge. In the woods, out of sight of the road, she found Flassin lying unmoving by a fire. Blankets were stacked by the cheery blaze, and she wrapped them around herself, taking in the warmth while her mentor lay still, barely breathing. A pot of stew had been warmed for her, as well, though the smoke still smelled of the herbs he had sprinkled into the fire to help him enter the world of dreams. She had finally warmed up enough to try the soup when Flassin opened his eyes and sat up, his breath quickening as he rose from his magical sleep. How did it go? My parents were avenged. Brielle nodded and dipped a spoon into the stew. The spoon shook in her fingers, and try through she might, she could not get it to hold still. The stew dripped from the spoon, and she thought of a trail of red pooling on the floor of the reading room and shut her eyes. It was done. She was done. Good, she smiled. Orlesian nobles. Not immortal like our ancient ancestors, but fairly hard to kill nevertheless. Nicely done. Thank you. Brielle got the spoon to her mouth, took a bite, and realized that she was ravenous. She forced herself to chew and let the warmth spread out through her with each bite. Are you sure you're ready to go back? Flassin asked after a time. You're absolutely positive that Celine will take you back to her house? Brielle thought of Celine's lips crushing her, and she felt herself flush. Yes, she'll take me back. Then you will do much good for the elves in the palace at Valriot, Flassin said, and glanced over. Do not doubt that, Delaine. I still wish that I could see the Dalish. She scraped the spoon against the bottom of the pot, then put both aside. I know. Flassin smiled. But Valriot is where you are needed. The Dalish will help as they can. You help as you can. Tattoos upon your face do not make you a true elf, he added, when she was silent. Be proud of who you are. Coming up from the water, Brielle took in a great lungful of air. By the time she finished scrubbing the dirt from her limbs and rinsing the smoke from her hair, her body had gone comfortably numb. She swam, thinking of nothing, then looked up as she felt wetness sprinkle her face. The gray clouds overhead had opened up with thick, wet raindrops. It turned from a sprinkle to a steady downpour even as she swam back to shore, jabbing her feet on the rocks by the shore. The rain had soaked through her underclothes, and she shivered as she put them on. She pulled on her boots, but carried the rest of her armor rather than wear it wet. She had been in Celine's court for too long. Too many years being called Rabbit, too many years ducking her head and working from the shadows. Too many years of being proud of who she was, a feeling she could cling to like a floating dog in a rushing river. It had kept her head above water, but had never let her steer her own course. She would fight for her people, because nobody else would, and Fen Harel take whoever got in her way.